than Sam Dunn from Banger Films. And I'm so excited because not only is Sam a good friend of mine and the band's, a fan of his work. Welcome, Sam. Thank you for taking the time on Saturday.
You bet, Ted. Great to see you. Yeah, nice to be here. I'm looking forward to having a long chat about all things metal and otherwise.
Totally. How's things up in the Canada area?
We're doing all right, and I live in Toronto, so unfortunately, recently we went back into another lockdown phase of COVID, which is really unfortunate, but I'm just thankful my kids are healthy, our neighborhood, everything is cool. So, knock on wood, we're doing all right. Thank you.
Yeah, same here. We went to another lockdown. It's crazy times, man. It's crazy times, especially with the industry, things, there's a lot of things opening up slowly, but, with our field, the music industry, it's pretty much shut down.
I know it's throwing a lot of things into perspective, speaking from a fan of music, just as many people have said, just to be honest with you, it's not like I get to a lot of live shows these days because I'm so busy and I've got 2 young kids, but just the idea that I can't do that is like this looming darkness that is tough, but in relative terms, I'm healthy, so I'll take it,
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Yeah, knowing the fact that you can't go, even though you can't go, just them going, hey, you can't go. But for me with the lockdown, the good side, the flip side, I have to look at the positive end is like, I got to reconnect with being home for a bit, because usually when you're touring, you're always in and out. When you get home, you only have a certain amount of time. You're always thinking about the next tour and in and out, go. So I got to reconnect with home, got to do a lot of things and just relax. I'm pretty sure, you have a stressful job, not a stressful job, but you guys are busy. So it must have been cool to at least spend time with the kids and the family too, right?
Yeah, obviously with 2 young kids, like they both were at home in the early days of COVID. And so we spent a lot of time together, which was great, and my wife's been amazing and just, helping keep things moving forward, and I'm lucky we've got a place a couple hours north of Toronto. So we've actually been spending a lot of time out in nature, like just walking the trails and,
Nice.
kind of breathing the air. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's been we're so fortunate to have something like this because it's just sort of like is an opportunity for us to get out together and do positive things outdoors. So that's been great. That's a silver lining for sure, being out in nature with the kids. Yeah.
That's awesome. Have you, being out in nature, have you find some inspiration out there?
That's a great question. I think it's more about giving my brain some space and, and learning to quiet the mind, right? As the Zen practitioners say, I think it's a real challenge, with our line of work at Banger, we go down these deep rabbit holes of producing films and TV series, and we've got a team and we've got so many great people. Like there's a lot of people management, there's a lot of focusing on just making sure what we're creating is great. And, you can't really ever take your eye off fully what's going on, right? So being in nature for me, I think is inspiration in the sense that it's like, there's other things to enjoy, and just a chance to kind of turn things off a bit. That's the value of it for me.
Yeah, totally. Like you need to disconnect every now and then to kind of recharge the battery and recharge the mind,
Absolutely.
Speaking of Banger Films, before I just want to say this. The last time I saw you, we played at Lee's Palace in Toronto. Yeah. And that day they go, our tour manager goes, hey, you have an interview, they're picking you up, you're doing it with Banger Films. And I said, all right, that'd be fun. And seriously, I thought I was just gonna go to maybe like a rehearsal studio. Like, I didn't know how big Banger was. I said, okay, we're gonna go to somebody's studio or somebody's place in their house. Drove up, walk into this building. I was like, Dude, I thought I was at a tech company in Silicon Valley, man. Your setup was amazing. I mean, I got the tour, like this is the edit room, this is post-production, then you had the big room where you do all the films. I was really, really impressed and in awe of the way you have it all set up.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, it's been, Scott and I formed the company in 2004, right? So we're 16 years in, and we kind of started out with this crazy idea at the time that we wanted to make a really good, smart film about metal, and because we felt it needed to be done. And obviously that evolved into doing more feature films and then into series work, and then we started to expand out into other areas. And it just, it's grown sort of year by year. So now we've got a bit of an operation going. We got 8 edit suites, and we've got like a full post team. We got business affairs. We've got such incredible people that work with us at Banger, especially navigating through COVID and how it's disrupted work for us, and everyone's also juggling their family lives. So, it's a cliche, but it's really been about the team to help build it and keep it going. So, there's times maybe when I wish things were a little bit simpler.
Yeah.
Look back in those early days when all that mattered was making one film and doing it really well. Now we've got multiple things going on at once, and so it's busy, but it means we just get to do more. And at heart, we're music nerds, that just want to make good stuff. So that's us.
Yeah, I hear you, man. Hey, be careful what you wish for, Sam. Like you said, you started with one film and now it starts to trickle into other things, which I want to get to. Dude, you have a master's in anthropology. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes, that is.
Now, did you get a master's for that to get into film, or were you leaning towards something else?
Well, I grew up in Victoria, BC on the West Coast, and I lived there. I did my undergrad there in anthropology and history. And actually after high school, the fork in the road for me really was whether I wanted to pursue music more seriously, because I grew up playing music. I'm a bass player. I played in bands as a teenager, so that was the fork in the road. And I just decided I wasn't so sure that I wanted to actually do music, 24/7. So I'd always grown up with a huge fascination with geography and different cultures around the world, and just the way people live their lives in different ways, depending on, where they live and their beliefs and the world and the environment around them. So that led to anthropology. And then I moved to Toronto to do my master's after I'd finished my BA, because Victoria is a really great place to grow up. I gotta say, man, I was lucky. I mean, it's so beautiful, and it's pretty mellow, and it's a nice place. But you sort of hit your mid-20s and you're like, this is starting to feel a little bit claustrophobic. Like we're on an island. Unless you're going to work for the government or in tourism, there's not a lot going on. So I was like, okay, that's it. I got to go somewhere bigger. I went to Toronto to do my master's in anthropology, and I wasn't focused on film at all, and I was doing my degree. My passion was actually in refugee studies. I spent some time in Central America, sort of learning about the people from Guatemala specifically, and the struggles of the indigenous people in Guatemala, and, learn a bit of Spanish, and, and that was the focus of my thesis. But it's funny, like as I was getting towards the end of my degree, I was writing a master's thesis, which was this huge thing that I'd never done before. And I started to kind of look for other things to get distracted by.
Yeah.
And honestly, it was when I picked up a couple books written by academics who'd actually written about metal music. Like I literally went to the library one day and said, I wonder if an anthropologist has ever written anything about metal, And it turned out there were 2 books, one written by a sociologist, one written by a musicologist. And being such a nerd and a metal fan, they were like page turners. Like I finished them in a week, and I was like, wow. Oh my God. Like, it was like the clouds kind of opened up, and it inspired me to write a book. And then my good buddy, Scott McFadden, who, we own Banger together, he was a music supervisor in Toronto. He really wanted to get into film and television and had started to work in film and TV. And I was talking about wanting to write this book about metal, that I felt like someone needed to write a really good history of the music. And this is early 2000s, right? Like late 90s, early 2000s. So it's a while ago now, and he just turned to me one day and said, what about a documentary? We were like, okay, let's look into that. And we realized that when it came to representations of metal on screen at that time, you really only had Spinal Tap, Decline of Western Civilization, and Wayne's World, if even that counts. And we realized, we're like, okay, maybe there's something here. Maybe there's room here to actually do a film about the history and the culture of metal. So that's the long and meandering path that led me to where I am.
Wow. So, Anthropology did come in handy for you.
Well, it's funny because I guess it was always, because of my studies, it was always my perspective. And I think what anthropology brings as a perspective is it really is about understanding the way people live on their own terms, right? And not having a sort of Western bias or Western set of judgment or values that you're imposing on the way that people live. That's a very broad sort of definition, I guess, of the anthropological perspective. And so with the first film, what we kind of did was we ended up kind of putting metal under the lens of anthropology and looked at it as if we were looking at sort of like a mysterious culture, if you will.
Gotcha.
But at the same time, because it was music that I grew up and adored and was super passionate about, it turned in sort of a two-dimensional perspective, one part fan, one part anthropology. And I guess it worked. It meant that the fans of the music felt like the story was being told by someone who lived it and understood it. And we know as metal heads how important that is. And we can sniff out a fake a mile away.
Oh,
right?
Totally, dude. Oh, totally. Right. A poser.
But exactly, as we used to say in the 80s, but the other perspective is, if you go too far down that perspective of the fan, you can exclude a lot of people. You're all of a sudden just telling a story that is only for people that care about the music. And we wanted to actually take it as a culture and as an art form and present it to people who had a lot of biases or stereotypes or misunderstood what it was all about, right? So it ended up being an attempt to juggle those two perspectives.
The Headbanger's Journey was the first film you worked on for metal, right? Am I correct?
Yeah, that was the first.
Did you know what you were getting yourself into? The amount of work. I mean, I'm sure like, okay, I want to make it like this, and like what you talk about, you want to present it as a culture and expand it to the world. Did you know what, like, whoa, like, did you get into it going, what did we get ourselves into? This is a lot of stuff here.
Dude, I still say that every time we take on a new show, and I've been doing this for a while. Every project feels like careful what you ask for, but of course, this is how we earn our living. And hey, it's what we love to do. So I'm certainly not complaining at all. I think with the first film, I'm thankful that, my partner, Scott, like he had a background in film, in television, and had worked in theater previously and was also a music supervisor. So he had a deeper understanding of the sort of film industry and navigating that world. And I think the other piece was really that, again, it's a cliche, but we just hired people that were good, and we just felt that understood what we were trying to do. Because, when you sit down and watch a film and you see the credits rolling at the end and it's like 5 minutes long, how the hell what did all these people do? And then I realized, like, when we finished our first film, I remember sitting in the theater on our premiere and going, yeah, right. Yeah, it takes a village to make a movie, and so a big part of it for us was just obviously bringing on people that had experience, you know, particularly our editor, Mike Munn, who already at that time was super experienced and such a craftsman when it came to understanding how to like really unravel a story on screen. It certainly was something that I didn't know how to do. I mean, that first film, I was really bringing my understanding of the music, you know, the anthropological perspective, which we talked about, a real passion for the music. And I think we wanted it to be legit, right? And I think, you know, that's because I was a fan. And I think it was key that I was a fan, not just of like the popular metal, right? And this may seem like detail, but it was, in hindsight, it was a big thing. Like my favorite bands, no disrespect, were not Poison, etc. Even though I listened to those bands when I was first getting into the music, like the bands that I fell in love with were Voivod and Sepultura and Death Angel and of course Metallica and Slayer and Maiden and on. So if you had that deeper layer of understanding, I think that meant that we were bringing a real kind of authentic perspective to the music.
Gotcha. Now, was it really hard to get a hold of these bands? Like, did you had to go through managements, agents, labels? I mean, to the documentary is awesome. Like, how did you do that? How did you have endless phone calls, endless emails, like meetings getting scheduled, bands saying no, then you get them to say yes later? I mean, what was that process like?
It was hard. You know, I remember, like, it's going back a while. We actually wrote letters, like actually put letters in the mail.
And with your letterhead and all that letterhead, Banger Films, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, well, we didn't even have Banger Films letterhead at that time. So, you know, we kind of did it old school. You know, as I said before, and I'll say it again, I think without question, the most pivotal person in terms of us breaking through and enabling us to actually see that this could be a reality making this film was Rod Smallwood, the manager of Iron Maiden.
I heard a lot of good things about him. He's been with them for a long time.
Yeah. And, you know, for whatever reason, you know, something we said, something we wrote, something we did gave him, I guess, an inkling that what we were doing, even though we had never made a film before, no one had really ever heard of us in the film and TV biz at that time, he kind of believed in what we were doing, you know, and that was a huge step for us because, you know, once you've got the stamp of approval from Iron Maiden's manager, it opens a lot of doors.
Yeah. Now, speaking of Iron Maiden, which I bought this film, very good, very, very well put together. Would it be safe to say that Iron Maiden is your favorite band?
Yeah. I never would have been able to say that with such authority, I think, before I started making films about metal and getting asked that question, you know, and if I had to be stuck on an island with one metal band, I think it would be Iron Maiden. You know, Power Slave was the big one for me growing up. Power Slave Live After Death, and Live After Death was such a pivotal record because it had songs from the back catalog, right? So it was the gateway to moving back from Power Slave to those early albums. But, you know, like so many others, Maiden just connected on a deep level, both the musicianship, you know, the grandeur and the scale of the music was really, really attractive to me, you know, as a teenager. I'm a bass player, so Steve Harris, you know, one of the all-time greats. I sat in my room trying to learn all those bass lines. So yeah, Maiden's my desert island metal band for sure.
Okay, so I guess I wouldn't stump you if I said Priest or Maiden to you, huh?
You know, I was into Priest and still am, but it was never, and that's, you know, it's an age-old fork in the road, I think, that we will continue to talk about into the ages. But yeah, I think Maiden, for me, I loved, you know, Screaming for Vengeance is probably my favorite metal album cover of all time. I think it's one of the most brilliant, boldest, ballsy images for metal. Great album. But I think Maiden just kind of had that, for me, and I realize now, I didn't know it at the time, they grew up on a lot of progressive rock music, right? And so I think I was attracted to those longer songs, those big epic compositions like Hallowed Be Thy Name and Rhyme an Ancient Mariner, where there were all these parts and there was a story that was being told. I think, knowing what I know now, I realize that's what I was really, digging as a teenager.
Gotcha. Wow. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, because, that's the question everyone, like, I stump people like Priest or Maiden, and it's just like they have a headache. It's hard to choose. But would you? I already know the answer. It's Maiden. Now, speaking of Flight 666, how did this come together? Was this your idea? Like, I want to do something with Maiden, or was it their idea that they reached out to you? How did this come about? Did you guys have meetings and kind of find it interesting?
Yeah, it was an idea that Scott, I think, had reached out to Rod at one point and started talking about potential projects, and threw out the idea of maybe doing something based on the tour, and then of course with the plane and the way they put the Somewhere Back in Time tour together back in, this is 2008 now. It just seemed like a great opportunity. I think I remember in the early days creatively, like, not really being sure about whether it should just be like really a pure tour follow documentary. We were still playing with ideas around like, well, maybe it should be touching on like what Maiden means in different cultures around the world. Cause that was actually, pardon me, what we had done with our second film, Global Metal, which was looking at how metal had resonated with people around the world. So we were still debating, should it be picking up more on that theme or not? But then as we got into it and talked more about it with Rod, it was like, no, this is an incredible tour. Everything's going in the plane, the band, the gear, the crew. Bruce is flying the thing. They're going to hit whatever it was. I can't remember the numbers now. It was 7 weeks, dozens of countries. And it was like, nope, that's what it needs to be. That's all it needs to be, is we just need to get on that plane and follow this band to all these countries they were visiting. And man, I got to say, of all the projects we've done, that's the one that I would want to do again.
Really? So you were out. You were out for 7 weeks with them? You were straight. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's insane. Now, how many camera people did you have with you?
We had a crew of 7 people, I think. And we had one main DOP with us, and we had an assistant, his assistant, who did a lot of camera operating. And so, what we did was, when we touched down and filmed songs in each of those different countries, we filmed where we decided ahead of time what the song would be we were featuring from which country, right? So Aces High was first, and that was going to be Mumbai, and then on and on and on. So we kind of had a roadmap in that sense. So, but we knew we had limited cameras. And so what we did is this is kind of hard to explain, but on the non-feature songs from the particular city. So Mumbai, we knew the feature song was Aces High. So on all the other songs, we shot the musicians in a way that we knew we would be able to cut in and put elsewhere. So for example, I think Monterrey, Mexico is Wasted Years. My apologies if I'm forgetting. But so when we filmed Wasted Years in all the other countries, we just do like tight shots of the hands on the guitarists, and the guys wore the same thing every night. And this was a key thing.
Wow.
So what that meant is when, in the film, when you get to a particular city and you get the feature song from that particular place, it looks like it's being shot with 8 cameras, but the reality is there was only 2. So it's a long answer, but that was a practical solution that enabled us to kind of make those songs in that documentary kind of look and feel bigger, as big as we possibly could.
Gotcha. Wow, that's interesting to hear, some behind the scenes stuff. Now, was there
a giant chart on the wall that kind of mapped out all the songs and how we were going to do it? Experience.
That's a lot of planning. Now, when you have all this camera crew, was cameras rolling all the time, or was there certain things you couldn't film, like you can't film in here, there, or you had free reign, like keep the cameras rolling?
We had pretty free reign until the guy said, "Nope, sorry guys, cameras off." Before we stepped on the plane, it was in Stansted in London where the plane departed, where we left from London to go to India. Bruce we had met because I had interviewed him for Headbanger's Journey. We had briefly interviewed Adrian and Dave for Global Metal, but we didn't really know them. We didn't really know the band that well. So, the first few days, you're kind of like, you're being careful. You're moving around. You don't want to get in the way. You don't want to be imposing too much. And I've said it before, the best compliment we ever got was after a few days, I forget who said it. Maybe it was Adrian, kind of turned to us and said, we kind of don't even notice you guys are here anymore. And that was the best compliment, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what we wanted it to be. We wanted to be flies on the wall. We didn't really want to impose ourselves. Obviously, we did interviews with the members and with Rod and with different people in the crew throughout the tour. But when it came to being on the plane or following them from the plane to the venue or hotels and all that kind of stuff, we just kind of wanted to be there, hovering with the camera, staying out of the way.
Wow. It's hard. For us, sometimes we have a video guy, with us on tour. And it could be annoying at some points just having the camera right there, having the cameras on all the time. But, you have to capture everything because you don't know what you're going to get. You can get that magical moment footage where you can't recreate. You go, oh, we missed that. Could you do it again? Like, it's not the same, really,
Yeah, but, and then you always miss something. Even though you think you got the camera on all the time, it's like there's always something you're going to miss. And I think as time has passed, I just get better at being like, all right, it's okay. C'est la vie. Let it go. There'll be another one.
Of course. But you're like, oh man, I wish I had the camera.
Oh, in the moment, it feels like your career is over.
I bet. But you got, like you said, you have to let it go. Now, 7 weeks with Iron Maiden, multiple countries. I know you did Latin America, South America, India, Australia, some of the States, and Europe. I think Europe. What?
No Europe, not on that tour. Yeah, no, just all the other areas though, but no Europe, no.
What country stood out the most as the most passionate fans for Maiden?
Well, I think it would probably be a toss-up between Costa Rica and Colombia.
Wow. I would assume it would have been in the Latin American countries. They're pretty wild out there,
For sure. Colombia was intense. They had the military police there on horseback. It's in the film. Like they were corralling people into the venue and, everyone had to take off their shoes and belts and everything to get for the security check, like literally had to take them off. And then, I remember people didn't even wait to put their shoes back on. Like they literally picked up their shoes and ran in their socks to the front of the stage. This is like when the gates opened, like in the middle of the day, right? Like so intense, you know, people who've been saving up for years
Yeah.
and who traveled across the country to see this band. And same goes for, you know, San Jose and Costa Rica. That audience was crazy. You know, there's a guy in the film who said he quit his job, you know, to travel to be at the Maiden show. Like, you know, and again, you know, as I said earlier, perspective is everything. You know, made me realize how spoiled we are, you know, in the North, and, you know, in the, you know, in relatively affluent, you know, countries, that we kind of take this stuff for granted, because Maiden's been coming to town, you know, every 2 or 3 years since the 80s for a lot of people, right? So to feel that energy come off people, that it was like literally fulfilling a dream, and these people were like in their 20s, you know, so they'd been waiting a long time to see this band. So yeah, man, that energy was like, that's why I say it's the one I would do again, because you don't get near that kind of energy very often in your lifetime, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we've done some shows in South America, and it's unreal, man, how passionate they are down there. Like they've been waiting, and when you finally get there, they just, I mean, it's kind of scary in a way, but not. You know, it's kind of like, whoa, they're pretty crazy, but something positive about their energy kind of creeps out, and you go, okay, it's all right. You're scary at first, but you know,
Yeah.
you're into it, you know. But
There's that vibe of things sort of teetering a bit on the edge of something.
exactly.
Something else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I've seen scenes where the hotel, people were waiting at the hotel. It's unreal.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
so
And I'm just glad we were there in the case of Maiden, that we were there, you know, the first time they took the plane out, and the first time they had played a few of these countries, or that they had played, you know, they hadn't played there in a long, long time. To be there to capture that, you know, was, again, yeah, a once in a lifetime chance, really.
how is Bruce Dickinson as a pilot?
Hey, I don't know how to fly a plane, but he does, man. He's super solid. I'll take it. I'll take it. You know, we kind of made it look like he flew the plane a little more than he really did.
Okay.
Because of his, because, you know, pilots have sleep requirements, right?
Yeah.
So he wouldn't be able to fly unless he had a certain amount of rest before flying. So it was on some of the longer gaps. You know, if there's a 3-day gap between shows or something like that, then those would be the instances where he would fly. But yeah, pretty cool sitting in the cabin and having Dickinson come over the speakers, you know.
That must be so cool, man. Just like, man, Bruce Dickinson is flying a plane that I'm in, and he's playing in my favorite band. That must have been awesome.
It was awesome. You know, also I'm glad that, you know, I guess when we made that film, I was in my mid-30s. So
wow.
You know, we'd had a couple films under our belt. So, you know, I could keep the fan factor a little more under control. If I had been 16 on that plane and Bruce was flying, I would have been bouncing off the walls for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to have that fanboy in you. You know, I mean, it's what you live for. You know, I mean, as soon as that's gone, you might as well just kind of give up. You know, I still fanboy out when I see certain bands, like, oh shit.
Fuck. Yeah.
Right.
I don't know any other way. You know, I'm a fan of music, and as soon as I hear songs kick in, you know, it's deep. You know, music is deep with me. It's very powerful thing. I realize it more and more as, you know, years go on, that how much music means to me. It's, you know, my life is unimaginable without it, because, you know, I'm not a professional musician, but, you know, I spend a lot of time sitting with musicians and filming musicians and talking about their lives, and, you know, they're telling their stories and what music means to them. So, you know, my life is unthinkable without music. So I think
I think we all feel the same way, whether it's metal, rock, or whatever. Music is it's like air. We need it. It's food. We need it. You know.
For sure, for
So
sure. I have it on all the time, as much as I possibly can. You know.
exactly. Iron Maiden, when you were done, the last show you wrapped up. How long did it take for you to edit everything together? That's a lot of footage, man, to go
Yeah,
through, and to have to tell a story about that tour.
sure. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the tour went from January to March 2008. It ended in Toronto, so we landed in our home city, which was cool. It was about 6 months from there, if I'm not mistaken, which actually, and it's going to maybe be weird to hear this, but relative to other films, it was quicker because we knew it was by no means a simple film to make, but it was simpler than, say, Headbanger's Journey or doing the film with Rush or with Alice Cooper or ZZ Top, where you're constructing a story about a band's career. There's a lot of decisions to make in terms of what's in and what's out and what's the best version of this story, right? So with the Maiden doc, it was a challenge, but it was relatively quicker because it was like, this is just a juggernaut. We're going to take people from one city to the next. And so, 6 months of editing is actually short for us when it comes to like a feature film. It can sometimes take up to a year to actually edit these films. So yeah, definitely had its challenges. Probably the main thing is what's the balance we were going to strike between it being music, like the live shows, versus the travel, the experience and that energy of the travel, versus sort of weaving in as much story about the band and the fans as possible. So those were kind of the three elements. It was just about finding that right balance. It's like anything. It's like making a record, it's about finding the right balance in the songs and the energy. And when do you put the pedal down? When do you take it off? When do you need to really go for it? When do you need to give people a moment to breathe? All those things apply, and people who are in film and TV know that you need to provide those moments of transition and different emotions. So anyway, it's a long-winded answer, but the reality is it was shorter compared to other movies.
Wow. To us, that sounds long, but I could kind of relate. Like you said, it's a good analogy with a record. Sometimes a record could take 6 months to write, 2 months to record, and you got 3 months to release. So it could be about a good year,
Yeah.
I totally get that from a musical perspective. With video, same thing, but same devil, different level, as I would like to say.
Well, I'll put. I'm going to use that. That's a good one.
Yeah. Now the Rush one, I know you did Rush. Me and my wife watched that one. What we found so interesting is some of the footage that they had that they supplied you. The one footage that really stands out was when Alex Lifeson was telling his parents he wanted to do music full time. How the hell did the thought of having a camera there at that time, him telling his parents over dinner, I want to be a musician. I mean, I wouldn't have thought of that being young. You know what I mean? Hey, could you film me while I tell my parents I'm gonna not going to college and I'm gonna be a musician? The footage is great.
Yeah, there's a bit of a story behind that. When Alex was a teenager, he actually participated in this documentary that was being made by, a legendary Canadian documentary filmmaker named Alan King. He just wanted to do this very simple kind of observational documentary about teenagers going through a transition in their lives. And Alex just happened to be one of those teenagers.
Wow.
So that footage comes from a pre-existing documentary where Alex was part of this group of kids. They went out somewhere, maybe out here somewhere in the country in Ontario, and just to kind of capture this moment in their lives. And it just so happened that one of those kids ended up being Alex Lifeson of Rush. And it's one of those gold mine finds as a documentary filmmaker where you're just like, man, you wish you could find something like that with every artist you work with, right? Because you just don't get those opportunities very often to see what people are actually going through at that time in their lives, a time of, big decisions and a transition and feeling like the weight of the world is, what it's like to be a teenager. Like every decision feels like it's like loaded. Right?
Totally. I mean, that's one of my favorite parts. Like, how did they get this clip that kind of helped makes the documentary in a way a part of it? Because like you said, it's a gem, it's a gold mine. Like, wow, I was just so intrigued. Like, oh man, I'm glad they found this clip and put it in there. It's awesome.
Yeah, well, it's one of those moments, like I said, it's like, those are real break moments, because documentary filmmaking can be, it can require a lot of patience and persistence, and, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, it's definitely, you're the tortoise and not the hare.
Yeah, totally.
We're not making commercials or music videos, we're making these long stories. And so when you find footage like that, like it is like you're finding a nugget of gold, in and amongst the rubble. And
exactly.
It can help. Just now you've got a whole scene to frame the film around, right? And you can do interviews and talk about that moment, which it was a great find.
Awesome. Neil Peart, rest in peace. I've heard a lot of stories about him, but when I see, like he stays away from the limelight, it's always Alex and Getty. But when I do see interviews with him, he's so cheery and so happy. I mean, was it hard for him, because I heard he doesn't like doing interviews or talking about drums or nothing. Did you find that difficult to interview him at times because he was like that?
It's a bit of a mixed answer. I mean, on one hand, well, first, let me say, the other bass player I worshipped other than Steve Harris was Geddy Lee as a teenager, right?
Of course.
Spent hours in my bedroom trying to learn those songs. I was really into their music. So it was another case like Maiden, where I was having a chance to sit down with some heroes of mine and try and help tell their story. And so because of that, like with Neil in particular, like I was kind of intimidated because he didn't do a lot of interviews, and he wasn't really all that interested in kind of spending time in front of the camera. And he was such a powerful intellect and artistic mind, right? Like not only that, I mean, that drumming is it's inhuman.
Unreal. Yeah. Unreal.
And of course, because he wrote the lyrics, he's got this brain on his shoulders that just seemed unparalleled in a lot of ways. So sitting down with him was kind of intimidating. So there was that piece for me. But the other side of it, which was interesting, was that because he was the guy in the band that tended to do fewer interviews, with Geddy and Alex, it took a bit of work, I found, to get them to kind of go beyond the kind of stock answers they tell the press. And that's actually a challenge for a lot of documentary filmmakers who work with, whether it's musicians or celebrities or figures in pop culture, politicians even, right? People who do a lot of press and media. They may not know that they do, but they've created a sort of construct. They've created a version of their story. And so sometimes to get beyond that is really challenging. With Neil, it was actually, I felt like we were getting the raw goods. So that was actually really cool. Even though, I had a lot of nervousness in sitting down with him. I learned pretty quickly that he was going to give a lot, and so, to this day, particularly now that he's passed, rest in peace, Neil, it's like, I feel so blessed that, we were the ones that got to make that film, and we were the ones that he opened up to, that's something I'm going to take with me forever. and it's not just about metal, it's not just about music, it's about, I think, people who are real, someone who needs to be respected and honored as a real artistic force, particularly in Canada. We're very proud of Rush being a Canadian band. They have the Order of Canada, right, which is our sort of honorary designation for people who have made important contributions to the arts or, social justice or et cetera. So yeah, Neil, to have that opportunity with Neil and have Neil actually tell his story really for the first time in any kind of fulsome sense, huge honor.
Wow. But that's pretty amazing. Cause I've heard stories about him, like, yeah, don't talk to him about drums. He doesn't like to be interviewed, blah, blah, blah. But the fact that you got him to kind of let go and just, be the real Neil for a minute is fucking awesome. And I enjoyed it. I was like, I hear these stories, and when I watched the documentary, I'm like, all right, man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's good to see.
It took time, it took patience, those interviews didn't happen overnight. I think we did 3 or 4 separate interviews with Neil and at least as many with Geddy and Alex. So it's a real, it takes time to piece those stories together. And the $1 million word here is trust, just establishing trust, especially with bands that have been doing it for a long time, and who are these guys to tell our story, right? You got to kind of earn that.
But sure. I know what you mean by, you said, moving back a little, stock answers, getting beyond that. Yeah, I know what you mean. Some people just kind of like, they don't want to go beyond and kind of let loose a little. I like it when an artist steps out of their box and just gives a little bit but not too much. There's a balance there that you want to get out.
For sure. I mean, I think obviously we all have boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Of what we will and won't talk about. That's human nature. That's about respect and privacy. And for example, with Rush, like the agreement we kind of made with the band when it came to talking about the horrible tragedies that had affected Neil with his wife and his daughter passing away.
Yeah.
Close proximity to one another in terms of time. The agreement we had was we were only going to talk about it insofar as how it affected the band, right? Because the band was the subject of the film. The band is the character. And we weren't interested in digging into it for any reasons other than that, right? So that provided kind of a helpful rudder for us in understanding, why are we really talking about this? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes, it can feel like you're being a bit predatorial, when you certainly start talking about things that, are such profoundly terrible experiences like what Neil went through. It's a delicate place to go. And so it was helpful, I think, both for Rush and us to go, okay, this is why we're doing this. The reason why is because when it happened to Neil, it affected the band. It affected the relationship. It affected whether they were going to continue as a band. As they say in the film, we were like, Rush is us 3. We're never doing it with anybody else. So we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen here. So yeah, that was, again, huge honor that they trusted us to handle that kind of precious cargo, so to speak.
Yeah, totally, man. Whew. That was like I said, all your docs are good. You know how to piece them together, which gets me to this next doc. There's 4 docs I'm going to talk about. I touch Maiden. I just touch upon Rush. Metal evolution. I mean, not metal evolution, hip hop evolution. Wow, that's a totally different genre. How did that come to the table?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it kind of starts with metal evolution, right? This is going back to the early 2000s. We'd done, we've done 4 feature films, you know, Headbanger's Journey, Global Metal, Maiden, and Rush. That's how we kind of got started. And then we wanted to do a series. And we always got a lot of great feedback on our heavy metal family tree, which we produced for the first film, right? And then we just thought, well, maybe we can turn this into a series. There'd never really been a good comprehensive history of metal that was done. And so we ended up doing that with VH1 and other networks around the world. That came out. There was 11 parts. And then I think, you know, for us, we were getting to the point where we knew we wanted to do more series. We didn't want to just make films. We wanted to get into TV as a way to grow. And we wanted to expand. And, you know, we've always seen the evolution concept as something that we could bring to other genres of music. And hip hop just seemed like the next logical step in terms of a form of music that hadn't really been really fully peeled away in terms of understanding the music and the culture and the origin story, you know, of that music. So, you know, and then we, you know, because, you know, I didn't grow up as a hip hop head, like, you know, I certainly listened to a small handful of hip hop artists, you know, in the 80s and 90s, like a lot of people, but it wasn't really in my blood, so to speak. So we brought on some fantastic creative people to come on and who really knew the music, who understood the music, and to help us tell that story, you know. And then, you know, if you'd asked me in 2004 if a series about hip hop would end up being the biggest thing we ever did.
Is it the biggest thing you ever did?
It's certainly the biggest in terms of, you know, hours on the screen. You know, there's 4 seasons, there's 16 episodes, it's 16 hours of hip hop. So
Wow.
we passed Metal Evolution on that one. And, you know, it's partly obviously because there's a deep story to tell in hip hop. The way it spread to different parts, to different cities around the US and even beyond that, you know, internationally, which we haven't really even got into yet in the series. But, you know, we knew we wanted to take time with it. You know, we'd like to think we carved out a space where we create stories about music that go a little deeper than everybody else. And, you know, one of our mantras has always been, you know, never really underestimate the appetite or the expertise of the fans, right? And never speak down to the fans, never present something that feels superficial or inauthentic. And we just tried, and that's all the stuff we had learned through making shows about metal. So we just tried to apply that to hip hop as well. And, you know, I can't share too many details yet, but soon enough, we're going to be applying it to other forms of music as well, which is all coming next year. So
awesome. How long did it take for Hip Hop Evolution to be like the process?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first season I think aired in 2016, but we had started doing the legwork. I remember recently I was going back trying to track down an old contact, and, you know, some of the first emails about Hip Hop Evolution were like in 2012, 2013, right?
Wow.
So what is that? That's 3 years till really the first season, and then the seasons rolled out sort of almost every year up until 2019. So from top to bottom, we're talking like a 6 or 7 year journey there.
Wow. Man, yeah, I didn't finish all of it. I saw it again. Good job. I mean, considering like you're a metal dude and having to jump into a different genre and have to research it. And like you said, you got to make it really authentic, you know?
Yeah, well, the key thing there, as I said, right back at our first film was, again, finding the right people that cared and understood hip hop as much as we did. You know, Scott and I, we felt our role is to kind of, well, we created a concept, call it a brand with Metal Evolution. Mm-hmm. So how do we take that kind of template, so to speak, and apply it to a different genre of music, but we weren't the experts. So, you know, the two lead creatives on that show, Rodrigo Bascunian and Darby Wheeler, like they ran with it and did a fantastic job, you know, and you know, Scott and I were there primarily just to make sure that we felt as well that the stories were being told in a quality way, you know.
That's awesome. I suggest everyone watch it. I mean, you know, with, you know, especially your documentaries, like for me, not only your documentaries or any other documentaries that I watch on Netflix or something, I mean, they're so good, even though like I'm not a big fan of hip hop. I like some of it, but it made me want to dive into it more after watching a lot of the series, because the amount of work and stories and all that stuff you put in makes you go, wow, really? I didn't know about that. I better check it out.
Yeah, well, that's the best compliment, because again, that's what we wanted to do with metal, right? So imagine you were a hip hop fan watching Headbanger's journey, right? Like it was,
Yeah.
we wanted to bring people in a way that was, you know, compelling, you know, and now, you know, we're music fans first. Metal's will always be the music that's deepest in my DNA, but really at the end of the day, we just want to tell good music stories, right? And
exactly.
and you know, and understanding that there's people that care about other styles of music just as much as they care about metal. And so it's just about, you know, applying that same level of respect and storytelling across the board.
And damn well you did a good job, which leads me next to the ZZ Top, little band from Texas. You did that one, and it's been nominated for a Grammy. Congratulations, Sam. That's awesome. That's awesome. And I'll tell you, I only heard of ZZ Top when like Eliminator came out. I think it was Eliminator when MTV blew them up. But you did the whole story before that, which I found like, wow, I have to go back, and again, I got to go back and listen to it, because I only know Eliminator. But Will Carroll in our band knows all about ZZ Top. You know, I'm like, yeah. I only know MTV ZZ Top.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
So I mean, are you a big fan of ZZ Top? That's why you did it, or did they approach you because of your stuff with Rush and Maiden and all that? How did the ZZ Top project come together?
It came about because we got approached by Eagle Rock, which is a distribution production company out of the UK that had distributed some of our earlier work, and we have a great relationship with. They had a long-standing relationship with ZZ Top and their management, and so they came to us to see if we wanted to make the film. And I actually was exactly like you. I discovered ZZ Top in the mid 80s with Eliminator and all those videos. And, you know, I remember it feeling like, who is this band? And where did this band come from? Like, it felt like I think for someone of my generation, who's maybe just a little too young to have grown up knowing the 70s ZZ Top records, right? It was like, they seemed like these bearded aliens, like
exactly.
Almost like a band with no history, right? It was like they just kind of dropped out of nowhere because the kind of quantum leap that they took in terms of popularity at that time was enormous. Like, this is a whole other topic, but like what music videos did in the 80s, you know, like there were a handful of groups that really went from here to here because of the music video phenomenon.
Yeah.
And I would argue ZZ Top was one of those bands that really, most of us had never heard of them, right?
And I haven't. I mean,
their songs were everywhere, and they had that unmistakable image that you could not, everyone knows who ZZ Top is because of their look, right?
Yeah.
Everybody. Even young people, millennials, you know, they know who ZZ Top is. So we approached the story precisely that way, was like, how did they get to this point? How did this happen? Like, where did they come from? Again, it seemed like they were the band without history to me. And so I learned a lot in, about those early albums, and actually really came to appreciate a lot of the earlier records, the first record, especially in Tres Hombres. And just it was a really fascinating journey to kind of just unravel that ascent to the Eliminator moment. And then we decided that's where we wanted to end the film, because they'd reached the top of the mountain, right? And we just found that it was a band that's been around for a long, long time. We just felt that was the most interesting chapter to tell.
Yeah, I think you did great. You stopped that like Eliminator, because everyone knows after that. You know what I mean? A lot of people like, yeah, I know ZZ Top. You didn't have to get into it. The fact that you did the story beforehand was like, it made me want to go back and go, okay, I'll check out ZZ Top. I even asked Will about it. Will has older siblings who listens to 70s rock. So he was exposed to ZZ Top before Eliminator, which, like you said, they just dropped out of nowhere. You watch MTV, it's like these guys are like, who are these guys? You think they were just a new band that formed a year ago.
Exactly.
And here they are. So
their videos were brilliant too, right? And that's why I wanted to talk about it in the movie, because they played on that kind of surrealist mystique. Like, it was even, even though you saw them play in those videos, it was also like, are they really a band? They're just kind of appearing on the roadside. It may seem a bit quaint now, in this age that we live in now, where we're saturated with imagery and information. But at that time, with music videos, and if you're, I don't know, I was 9 when Eliminator came out, right? So I was like, who the hell is this band? Anyway, yeah.
They came out of nowhere. But I'm going to ask you a question here. Out of your documentaries, your metal documentary, who is the one person in all of metal that stood out to you, that made a mark like that dude?
Wow.
I know it's a hard question. I wouldn't say one, but one of many.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you this, like the one person I've met in the time I've been in Death Angel touring that really stood out to me as being one of the kindest person, really genuine, really, who give their time to speak to, would be Ronnie James Dio.
Yeah.
He stood out for me.
Yeah, man, I've been so blessed. I've met sort of most of my heroes. It's a really hard question to answer. Answering that Iron Maiden is my favorite metal band of all time was easy.
Mm-hmm.
This one's a bit tougher. I don't know. And, at the risk of being redundant, and maybe it's because he's recently passed away, I mean, Neil Peart is one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. He's got that jovial energy, mixed with this like uncanny intellect, right? So it's just like just such an incredible, talented human. And maybe I'm feeling a little nostalgic because he's just left us. So I've been thinking more about him recently, but he's got to be up there. He is really, truly, when it comes to any performer on any instrument in any genre, Neil Peart is up there in the level of the gods. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he's like up there, like how another rest in peace, Eddie Van Halen.
Yeah.
It's like not only, like you said, the musicianship, but his lyrics are really good. The words he used, the phrasings, and it makes you go, wow, dude, incredible.
Yeah.
I wish I would have met him. But here's a little Death Angel trivia for you. Ooh. The album Act 3. I'm sure you know that one.
Yeah.
They were in talks to Alex Lifeson to produce that record.
Is that right?
Yeah. Then they got Max Norman.
I did not know that.
Well, there you go. You gave me some info. I'll give you a little info. Because I think at the time, Death Angels management knew the Rush camp or something at the time.
Really?
So
That's interesting.
I remember Rob telling me they were in talks. I think they met them at a show in the Bay Area. There were talks. Then Max Norman came into the picture, and he did Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman. And that was enough. Yeah, that was enough for them to go, that's the dude. He produced Randy Rhoads.
Would have been super cool to hear Alex Lifeson do a Death Angel record, but I think it turned out pretty good.
Yeah, I think it turned out pretty good. But the fact that he was interested was killer,
Yeah, that's awesome.
think it was, yeah. Now that I asked you the metal question, like who's the one that stood out, how about the hip hop?
Yeah, I didn't do any of the interviewing for the hip hop series. So,
Okay.
Which meant that I wasn't out there on the road. All the interviewing was done by Shad, the host, or, Darby and Rodrigo, who I had mentioned earlier. So, that wasn't a project I was out on the road with. But I got to say, this isn't really answering your question, but what I loved personally about working on that series was it allowed me to finally step out of like being the quote unquote expert, and sometimes being when you are so familiar with something, that's your perspective. You can't remove all that stuff that and you can't remove that feeling you feel when you listen to the music. And
yeah,
so more from a documentary storytelling perspective, it was really really pivotal for me to start stepping back and being able to look at it from a pure story standpoint, right? And that was a really valuable experience for me, which is kind of what's enabled me now to start working on other things, where I don't have the name of the band carved into my arm. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, totally.
And I've really enjoyed that. There's something kind of liberating about it, right? Because, it's like, fuck, we got to make a film about Rush. Oh my God. Like,
yeah.
so much respect for the band. And like, it can kind of cloud, it can kind of, realizing now in hindsight that it can kind of prevent you from seeing certain story opportunities. And so I've actually really enjoyed to some extent working on even ZZ Top, which is a band that, as I said, I didn't grow up listening to. I didn't know much about beyond the Eliminator stuff. I really enjoyed it because it's enabled me, I feel, to kind of improve my chops from more of a storytelling perspective, rather than kind of being a flag waver for metal, which has kind of been what part of my job has been for a while, right? Which is fantastic, it's a real honor, but at the same time, it's nice not to have to do that and just focus on the story,
Yeah, step back and go, all right, you not get all this like brain freeze of like, oh, it's gotta be right. You could just, all right, let me see what's going on here and absorb the vibe of what you guys are doing.
And be like, okay, I don't know anything about this band. What would be the story that would bring me in,
Gotcha.
Some ways it's easier. And nothing about what we do is easy, but in some ways liberating, I think, is the best word for it, for sure.
Gotcha. Is there a bucket list for you? Like, is there a band that you have that you go, I really want to do a documentary on that band and I know I'm going to kick ass doing it?
Well, certainly, and this goes to even before when Eddie passed, Van Halen for me has always been a bit of a holy grail story, particularly the David Lee Roth years, up to 83, 84. That run of records is such a phenomenal run, and it happened in such a short period of time. And there's really I know there's been books written about Van Halen, and I know that it would never be an easy film to make, for many reasons, and that's fine. And maybe it won't get done. Maybe someone will be blessed with the opportunity to do it one day. But certainly for me, that's one that I would love to do.
Yeah.
Because I feel not just for the purposes of sort of, hey, listen, Van Halen's place in the canon of rock legends is firmly established. They do not need a documentary to cement that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
It would be more about really digging deeper into the story about how that band came together, and again, what we were saying earlier about getting beyond the stock stories that we've heard many times over the years. To get the deeper story, to get the more intimate story, to get to understand who initially those four guys were as people, as kids. I love the thing I love about making these films probably more than anything is kind of going back one or two steps further than we know, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like you were saying about Alex, that footage of Alex Lifeson as a teenager, like that's the stuff I want to know. Like I
Exactly.
want to know who these musicians were as kids and their family life and their struggles growing up and those early days. That's the stuff I'm really fascinated with. And that's a part of the Van Halen story that I don't think it's there in pieces. It's definitely there if you're doing, but it's never been put together in any sort of definitive documentary way.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm interested in that stuff. What makes them tick, because it kind of segues into who they are today, you know? Like you said, we all seen the stock footages and stock stories, especially my favorite band, Metallica. The same stories told all the time. I buy DVDs, I've seen these documentaries. I'm like, can't you do something different or something, you know, like, but I like that, getting to know the people, their upbringing, and you're like, and it gives you an understanding of, oh, okay. But speaking of Eddie Van Halen, I had this discussion with a friend. I think he was the creator of what thrash metal guitar should sound like, that crunch. I mean, the first Van Halen record was, that guitar tone was so crunchy. I think that stems it from there. Because I've talked to people, I've talked to Dino from Fear Factory, when he goes, yeah, I got my first Marshall amp modified by the guy who did Edward Van Halen's. I wanted that tone. Everyone wanted that tone, but they just took it and made it their own. So he was the creator, I think, of the heavy metal guitar tone and everything else.
Yeah. Well, Eddie, and it's been said many times before, I'm not the first one to say it, he was one of the few people that have made an instrument sound completely different than what it had sounded before. Like he literally pulled sounds out of that instrument.
Yeah.
No one had heard. Like he seemed like an alchemist to me when I heard Eruption and those tones, especially on that first Van Halen record. You know, so for me as a music fan, that stuff is endlessly fascinating, you know, digging into how people create these sounds. You know, he's one of the greats that transformed it, you know, and they don't come around very often, you know, and
No.
so Eddie was he was the one that kind of redefined the guitar for me as well. I'm of that generation.
Yeah, I'm part of that generation with you too. I remember hearing that and going, I thought, who could play that? Like, can anyone else play that? But I mean, it just seems so impossible, you know? I mean, even not only his lead playing, but his songwriting, the rhythm playing, it was pretty like, whoa, it's not your standard like bar chord stuff. He was doing a lot of funkiness, a lot of even songs with tapping. You're like, whoa, that's a verse riff. Like he was like 20 steps ahead of everyone that time.
And it was like when you watched him play and when you watch him play now on video, it's like it still boggles my mind how he's getting all that sound out of that instrument, right? He's got that thing which it doesn't really look like he's always playing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's this orchestra coming out of this instrument, right? And he's just kind of moving his hands around. And, you know, I'm overstating it, but do you know what I mean? Like,
I totally get what you're saying on that one.
there is
I totally get it.
he is a magician at work there. You know, he's letting the instrument do a lot of the work. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
He's letting the sound take care of itself in a weird way. It's really hard to put into words what he had compared to others, but that's the best I can do. I hate to do this, Ted, but my family has arrived.
All right. And I was going to end this right here. I'm going to end it right now. We're going to
get invaded by some kids, and it is going to...
It's okay. It's okay. I'll end this thing. I want to, first of all, I want to thank you for being on the live and streaming. I want to thank you for your contributions in music and you telling the stories the way it should be told, and for us to really say, fuck yeah, someone gets it, and you're a big part of that. And thank you again, Sam. 2 more things. One more question. Your favorite Death Angel album?
You know, if the chip, that's hard, dude.
One of your favorites.
This is the one I should have fucking researched. This is the homework I should have known you were going to ask this.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think probably, I mean, it's probably got to be the Ultraviolence.
I get it, man. I get it. It's a great album.
But at the same time, and you know, me and you, we could talk all day. You know, and you know, there's something really fascinating about you guys, and you know, a lot of the bands of your generation, our generation, the Bay Area, like your careers now, and I think I've talked about this with you or Mark in the past, like your careers, you know, post like reunion is longer than it was before.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And to me, that's super fascinating because, you know, you guys have put out so many great records and there's been so many great songs sort of in the more recent era of Death Angel. And so I'm not like, I'm open to that. Like, you know, there's other bands who I think, and you know, a lot of people, one of my favorite all-time metal bands is At the Gates. And I thought that At War with Reality was it was almost as good as Slaughter of the Soul, maybe even better. And like, people didn't like to hear that. You know what I mean? My point in all this is, even though I've said Ultraviolence, like, respect to you guys for such a phenomenal and consistent output over the last couple of decades. It's remarkable.
Thank you.
What it does is it raises a middle finger to everyone that thinks that you can't make great metal as, you know, you get into your 30s and 40s and 50s and beyond. Like, it's proof that, you know, metal can age well just like a good wine. And it sounds like a terrible cliche, but it's true. Because I agree with you. So many bands of your generation that are still putting out records that are just as good as the, you know, the quote unquote heyday that everyone likes to talk about. So anyway, that's my ramble. But I'll go with Ultraviolence, man, because, you know, that cover, that logo, like, it imprinted on me in a big way. So I get it. I just gave you a stock answer after I talked about how much we hate stock.
Well, maybe in the new year we'll have a part 2 and we'll talk about more stuff. But Sam, thank you very much for spending the time. I really appreciate it. Everyone who's watching, go get your Banger Film shirt. I did. You got to support. You know, I want to support you so you can get more stuff going and enjoy your time with your family and kids.
Thank you.
And again, thanks for everyone who's listening. And I'll see you next week with a special guest. Sam, hang on for 1 minute.